First question is pretty simple, and I think it's just, why don't we just a yes or no, one word answer for now, and then I'll ask you to kind of delve into it. So, Audrey, do you think over the past 20 years, anxiety in young people has increased? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, Nate, do you think in the past 20 years, not thinking about COVID or the last few weeks or whatever, do you think anxiety in young people has increased?
I can't give a one-word answer for that, actually.
Okay.
I did. Come
I
on.
can't.
It was like the hardest thing I ever did in my life.
I cannot.
I could tell how you were struggling with that. So
I think, all right, I think if Audrey's going to say yes,
don't ever ask a therapist to give a one-word answer.
I think I'm going to have to say no.
DNA.
I think I might have to say no.
That's why I actually did it, Audrey. So let's tackle first why that was such a difficult question. So Audrey, why don't you talk first about why that was difficult for you to answer in one word, and kind of how you might justify how you flip to yes. Then I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, Nate, on the opposite side.
I said yes, so I have to defend yes, because now I want to say no. Yes. Okay, so if we think about anxiety and what that means, it means that there's some sort of body response to something in our environment, typically. So we can have a genetic makeup that makes us vulnerable to anxiety, and then something happens in the environment, and then that anxiety can get triggered and can last and stay for a long time. I feel as if there's more and more environmental triggers going on that's not allowing kids to process out one anxiety before the other one pops up. So my opinion is that there's just a constant inundation of information, and sometimes trauma, sometimes pressures. But I think times were slower 20 years ago. So there's a way to be triggered, feel it, process it, and then discharge it. But I think unfortunately there's trigger, we don't process it, we don't discharge it, there's another trigger, we don't discharge it, we don't process it. So I think the anxiety is because of the amount of environmental triggers that are triggering that anxiety. Not to say that World War I, II, and the Great Depression and all these things weren't anxiety provoking, they were, but I feel as if times were slower and allowed the body to heal. And I don't think we're allowing the body to heal anymore. And so therefore my answer is yes. Do we need to vote? I'm very competitive. Can we get our guests to vote on who's right?
Sure. Well, let's hear Nate's defense first, and then we'll do a vote. Okay.
I mean, if we're turning this into a debate, this will be. I don't think Audrey and I disagree a whole lot. So the reason I said no, there are a couple of reasons. One is the question was 20 years ago, and I was in high school and middle school 20 years ago, and I was a youth back then. And the question was about anxiety in young people. Anxiety was still very high back then. I don't think it's. It may be getting worse. But one thing is drastically different today than it was years ago, in that we're talking about it now. I didn't have a language for it when I was a student. Most of my peers didn't have a language for it. What we were going through was largely an internal, personal thing that you didn't really communicate about. Today, we talk about it a lot. We see it in classrooms. We see it in trauma-informed care. We see it in curriculum and external programs that people are able and willing and are interested in talking about mental health, which I think is a really good thing. I haven't looked at the diagnostic kind of statistics, but I suspect that there might be increased diagnoses. But one thing that we have to look at when it comes to increases in diagnostics is, has the condition gotten worse, or are we just better at acknowledging that it exists and putting it down on the table of statistics? So I still think anxiety is a major issue. I don't know that it's any more than it used to be, but I'm really glad to see that we're having conversations about it, and that there's a dialogue at that young age to start speaking about it, because the earlier you're able to identify it, the more you're going to be able to address it. And the earlier on you start to address something, the better you can be, and the healthier you can be sooner.
And that's actually exactly why I wanted to lead with this question, and why I asked it the way I did, because I thought there might be some differing viewpoints on it. Because I think my answer to that, I would not have followed the rules either, would have been, I don't know. I know that many young people struggle with anxiety in significant ways. But is that more than it was when I was a teen? A little bit more, a few years ago, a little bit more years ago than Nate was. Or is it because, like we said, we're more willing to talk about it? Our young people have been educated on how to talk about it. And more than that, they've been told it's okay to feel that way.
Yeah.
You know, different than when I was a teen, where it was sort of like, yeah, you know, anything above the neck was just sort of it'll be better, just be happy. I feel like teens today have a better better able to articulate that, because we as a society have not necessarily conditioned our young people in the same way that maybe we were conditioned to just sweep that under the rug. So the question is there more anxiety? Because the data shows there's more anxiety, no matter kind of what public health data you look at. It basically shows that if you look back 10 years, 20 years, that more teens are anxious today than prior. There was a study, I was on a call last night where a researcher actually referenced that in a couple different ways. But is it, like Nate said, was there just some things thrown onto the statistics because it's more prevalent?